So, starting immediately to my right, we have Juliene James, Senior Policy Advisor from the Office of Justice Programs, Bureau of Justice Assistance. As you may have guessed, Julie's here to talk about research practitioner partnerships from the funder's perspective. And for all of you, as Second Chance at Grantees, this is the meaty stuff you really want to hold on to. We're also joined by...
Lower your expectations.
We're also joined at the far end of the table by Dr. John Spear. John Spear is a principal and co-founder of Applied Research Services, Inc., and Dr. Spear designs and implements simulation software tools for correctional systems. I will give a quick shout out to some folks in the room. The state of Georgia is here, and John and the state of Georgia are a great example of this action-oriented research practitioner partnership. So we're lucky to have that perspective here. Then to John's left, we have Dr. Beth Skinner. Dr. Skinner coordinates the statewide recidivism reduction initiative for the Iowa Department of Corrections and is also an alumna of the Council of State Governments Justice Center. And lastly, but not least, we have Chris Watler, Project Director of the Harlem Community Justice Center for the Center for Court Innovation. And Chris is the Project Director of the Harlem Community Justice Center, a community court in Harlem that focuses on housing, youth crime, and offender reentry. I hope you've all been able to download the app for the conference. If you haven't, there's a sign out in the lobby that'll give you some instructions. I can also help you out after this session. The reason I bring that up is you can find more detailed biographies in that app. You can also check into and rate this session. If you're not going to rate it well, please don't check in. And I say all of that quickly because I want to give us as much time as possible to talk about the meat of this session. So I'm going to lay out for you what we consider to be the 3 stages of developing a strong research practitioner partnership. And if you'll forgive the cliche, we're going to talk about these in the context of a personal relationship. So you can consider dating, engagement, and then the marriage. So the dating stage is how you identify a suitable research partner. And I think we can, on both sides of the table, the researcher and practitioner, say that there are some valuable lessons to take from past experiences, just like in your personal relationships. So a couple of questions we suggest you ask are, what's your background? How do you envision the role of an evaluator? You know, we're all pretty familiar with, I think, that sort of the old school approach of you're the practitioner, you have an evaluator, and at the end of your project you hand over a data set and you hope to find something good. We want to do away with that. And the purpose of asking these questions is to go on a path forward and to figure out how to develop a feedback loop, how to have your research partner be a part of the planning process. They're a great resource. They can digest all that research out in the field, take away the lessons that other folks have learned the hard way so that practitioners in this relationship don't have to go through that. A couple of other questions to flag for you. I know you all should have the handout. If you don't, let me know at the end of the session. Second stage we call engagement, and that's developing the evaluation plan. So what are the goals of the initiative, and how are you going to reach them? How will you measure success, and will this require an IRB? We know that's a place where some partnerships get tripped up because all of a sudden people say, oh, you didn't tell me that was going to take 6 months. Have the conversation up front. Consider the data collection process. You know, no one should make any assumptions about whether the research partner is going to collect the data or if that's on the practitioner side. And we'll hear from these folks about different ways to navigate that and positives and negatives of each approach. What are the deliverables? So are you expecting a report at the end? Are you expecting feedback along the way? And we also say in this stage, don't forget the prenup. Think about what happens to presentations, publications, and data afterward. Lastly, you've got this great plan, so now you've got a marriage and you have to fulfill the contract. So some questions to discuss about that are, what should the feedback loop look like? So no practitioner should ever be in a position to be surprised by an evaluation report. And lastly, this is a loaded question, does the evaluation end when the money runs out? So with those very loaded questions, I am going to turn us over first to Julie to talk about this from a funder's perspective. At the end, we will have a Q&A session, so just hold on to your questions and we'll have some time.
I think this is an optimistic bunch, although realistic. I almost feel like we should have a stage 4, but maybe we won't talk about divorce in this session. Maybe that'll be for another time. If you've been to any of our meetings or conferences in the past couple of years, or American Probation and Parole Association meetings, Heather and I have presented on this topic in the past, there's been an increasing emphasis from our perspective at BJA on the research practitioner partnership and supporting a strong relationship. I think, we've evolved a little bit. And so initially it was like, just get a research partner. We want to document your results so that if they're successful, we can promote them nationally. But we saw a number of challenges to that and wanted to do a better job. So we took the lessons learned from the NIJ Research Practitioner Partnership Study and really tried to infuse that in all of our research practitioner partnership programs. Some of them are in the Second Chance Act, come through that funding stream, but there are a host of other programs at BJA that we're now calling the SMART Suite. And that includes SMART Supervision, which I oversee, as well as SMART Prosecution, SMART Defense, the Prescription Drug Monitoring Program, and a few others as well. And really central to that is we see it as our job to sort of move programs and approaches along the evidence-based continuum. You all have the good ideas, the innovations. We want to make sure that you're documenting what you do and tweaking it along the way. And if it's successful, then maybe one day we can introduce that into crimesolutions.gov with that big, nice check mark there. But that is sort of a long process that we want to support. So that's just kind of where BJA is coming from, and so you're going to hear more about that. On the issue of, I just wanted to talk about, what's the background, like where do you come from, what are your values? You guys are, kind of checking each other out for the first time in dating, Is the research partner really someone who is going to walk in the shoes of the PO or of the supervisor or of the administrator? I've seen a number of successful partnerships where someone who had been a PO now is a researcher, and that is incredibly valuable. It's not necessary, but I think you want to think about, is the research question going to have primacy for that person? Or is it going to be how a PO is going to be able to do their job in a day-to-day way and improve their ability to do their job? So that's just something to consider. One of the projects that we've supported in Connecticut involved POs with they were given scripts that they could work from that were CBT informed, and so they really workshopped those with the researcher and went back, month after month to kind of refine those things and say what was working for them and what wasn't. And that really built an unbelievable way the champions of changing the way that agency did business at that level. So those POs became really the spokespeople, and the people were saying, this actually works. This makes my job easier. I know what to do now in these sessions. So that's really what we're aiming for, is research partners who are focused on and aiming for making the people who are in the front line, helping them do their jobs better, and giving them tools to succeed. So that's just sort of my thoughts on stage one, how you identify a suitable partner. As far as engagement, I'm really laying out what your goals are for the project that you're looking at. As Heather mentioned, there's sort of this spectrum of traditional research where you have the data set that's dumped, and maybe the researcher doesn't really understand how it fell out on the ground and why you had to adjust things on the fly. We're trying to push things in the other direction toward action research, toward a regular feedback loop. It's a more involved relationship. If during a be if you're not regularly talking, I find this hard because I have 2 young kids, so my husband and I basically never talk. But it would be better if we did. Communication and feedback is key to really just, who's picking up the kids today? I still don't know the answer to that question. We talk a little bit about getting our hands dirty. I mean, this is not the sort of ivory tower type of research. This is, okay, we had this nice plan, we had a nice logic model, a theory of change. It's not working. Is the evaluator going to help you figure out how to adjust your approach? That is really something that we want to see happen. We don't want you to be afraid to tinker with the approach to make sure that it's having the effect that you're aiming for. So that, you kind of want to test that in when you're setting out your roles and responsibilities, whether that's something the researcher is comfortable with. There is a role for the RCT, the gold standard, in this area, right? But when we see that proposed in every proposal, that worries me, because I think it's not always going to be successful, especially in this context. There's a role, but we want to set people up for evaluation down the line and not necessarily have that be the goal from the outset. And so that doesn't mean that research products won't come out of the partnership, and that's, Heather sort of alluded to that earlier as well. I think that's perfect and wonderful if it does end up that way, and that would be sort of after the close of the project. So we hope that they do, but we also hope that that's not the sole goal of the research partner, and that should be something that you'll discuss. Did I lose marriage? I think this got cut off. So on the third stage, you've got the ring, I guess, and how frequently are you all talking about what the data looks like? I mean, that's something that can be fluid, but to talk about what's worked in the past. Is this something that will continue after the money runs out? We always are looking for sustainability plans when we're making our funding decisions. Have you thought about that next step? Federal funding is never meant to supplant the work that you're doing on the local level, and in fact, we think the job of this funding is to help you convince your funders at the local and state level that this is a program that's worth investing in. So if we can set you up with those kinds of presentations, PowerPoints, data, that you can make the case that your program is successful and is worth diverting funds from somewhere else, or a new course of business, that's when we feel that we've succeeded. Is there an opportunity for continued collaboration down the line? I think in my ideal world, we have Dr. Spear on the panel. They have had such a long and fruitful relationship with the stakeholders in Georgia, the justice agencies in Georgia, that they just are almost an arm, although an independent one, where they house the data, they have clean data, they can run analysis on an ongoing way. And now I'm stepping on John's toes, but I'd love to hear more about the way that's worked and how that's been successful in the long run. So I'll stop now, and glad to answer questions later, but honestly, you all are doing this, and I'm only feeding back what I've heard from our grantees, and so I'd love to make sure that we have time at the end to hear from you all about what's worked for you, the challenges, and any advice you have for us as we continue to support these relationships going forward.
Great. So, hi, I'm Chris. I work at the Center for Court Innovation in New York City, and I'm the project director of the Harlem Parole Reentry Court. So I'll begin with a couple of kind of big themes for me, around this. One is that if you're a practitioner, it's really, really, really hard to write grants and get money to do these projects, particularly when funders require you to do evaluation and don't fund it. So the thing that really was helpful for us is that BJA actually put their money where their mouth was and said, we're gonna, fund your work around research as well, in addition to the program. And that was extremely helpful, and that's a message I wanna get out to any donor or foundation or government entity, that you can't ask for results if you don't pay for it, essentially. The other thing is how important and valuable it is to make sure that the practitioners are consulted early on around what the evaluations are, that we understand it, and that the evaluation team and the practitioners, which is really what we're here to talk about today, work closely together. So So I'll tell you, a little bit about, our story. I'll begin with my Star Wars. I'm a big Star Wars geek, so so a long time ago, in a galaxy far, far away, there was a reentry court that was actually seated. It was one of the first 9 reentry courts in the country, seeded by the Department of Justice, and I do mean seeds of money, like it was not a lot. And that kicked off a collaboration with our state parole agency, which are now in New York, Parole and Corrections are merged. So when I refer to DOCS, it's really both. And we started a reentry court. It was inspired by the drug court work and the success that we were seeing as a country in drug courts, but no one really knew. I talk a lot with Jeremy Travis in New York about what were you guys thinking when you were doing this, and he said, we wanted to see if the same things that were working in the drug courts could work on the back end with people coming out. So we started a reentry court. We actually benefit from the fact the Center for Court Innovation is a nonprofit with a very robust kind of action research philosophy and team. So my colleagues actually are very experienced doing evaluation work, and the researcher on my project actually sits behind me, right? So that relationship, the dating, so to speak, we had a long-term date. So she understood our project and us. However, when we started, we really didn't know if this model was working, and so we did a retrospective analysis, and this was occurring right around the time the Department of Justice was letting out these things called Second Chance Act grants. So like any good Jedi, right, I said, I must secure this funding so that we can reduce recidivism.
Secure this funding, you will.
So we put in an application working closely with DOCS and DOCS leadership, and I was making all sorts of promises. So me and the deputy commissioner were talking all sorts of stuff we were going to do. I was unclear how it was going to happen if we got funding. Put in the application, lo and behold, we got it. Around the same time, we began to learn from our research a retrospective analysis of the program, and it had mixed results. It showed that we were good on reconvictions and new crimes, but we were not great in terms of technical violations. So our parole staff were sending people back at a higher rate. Research, they call this a supervision effect. So the mystery deepened, right? The force was not with us, it was working against us. And so the work that we did initially was to design a study, and it was ambitious, a random controlled trial. And we went to DOCS and said, we would like to tell you who to send to us. And those of you who work in corrections know that generally doesn't happen. So we had our own IRB, our own evaluation study. We designed it. Along the way, we tweaked it. So we're now in the engagement stage. We kind of got DOCS on board. We looked at the study and said, this is great. This is a good trial. We're going to learn some things. What else do we want to do? We talked about procedural justice and wanting to really hear the voices of the clients more. And so we also designed interviews, structured interviews that we would do with both control group participants and folks in the treatment group. And we also wanted to talk to the judges on the reentry court as well. So we really designed a very robust study with the investment that the Department of Justice provided. I worked very closely with the research team. We literally had meetings with my staff, the parole staff. It was very collaborative. There were all sorts of challenges along the way. When you had to interview someone, for example, who was in a prison upstate New York, we were sending researchers, to find those individuals, either at the jails or upstate. And you also, we had to work out different problems about how we would get information. There were some hiccups when we were not getting people that we had randomized into the program. For lots of different reasons, DOCS wasn't producing them in the program. So we had to figure those problems along the way out. I describe it as kind of changing the tires on a moving car, kind of what we did with the program. The investment that we made with the Second Chance Act funding was to incorporate evidence-based practices. So we literally were going to test the old program against the new program with Compass, with CBT, with the staff trained in MI, with a graduated response protocol. We were going to test if all these science-based things we had heard about, if we could get them to work. So I really want to have more of a conversation, but I think for practitioners, there's real value in doing this work, and even if you're successful, it doesn't mean your program gets funded, and like people are telling you that, like telling you you'll get there. No, this research is important because we're part of the movement that we should be proving that these kinds of approaches work and changing the way the game is played. So even if my program doesn't get all the money I think I deserve, we think it's important that this work happens. So the highlights are a 23% reduction in reconvictions, 60% reduction in felony reconvictions, 45% reduction in revocations. Our guys are among the mostly high to moderate risk. Those are the clients that we serve, and we're very proud of this work, and I look forward to talking with you all some more about it.
Very good.
Yeah.
Good morning. My name is Beth Skinner. I'm with the Iowa Department of Corrections. We're a Second Chance Act grantee. I'm a Superman fan. So like, it's a bird, it's a plane, it's a Second Chance Act grant, recidivist reduction strategy. So we got to keep the theme going, John. So
I got mine ready, don't worry.
Okay, good. So I really like how Heather laid this out. I'm going to talk about the three components as well from a practitioner perspective. The first one I want to talk about is, identifying a suitable partner. Just like any, dating, you want to do a little background if it's dating strategy, do a little background, know the experience and background of the person you're working with. For example, at Iowa, working with the CJJP, which is our third-party evaluator for the grant, we've had a lot of history with them, so we know their background, we know their research experience, their approach to statistical analysis, the level of rigor they use in terms of their data analysis. So it was really good having that kind of background, with them. I think what's really important as well is working with a partner that has a baseline understanding of just corrections data and what that is and what that looks like, whether it be recidivism measures or intermediate measures. I'll talk about that in a second. And just knowing the corrections language. And I think Julie kind of touched that, lightly about, having that kind of background and that experience, working in the correctional field is very helpful. And then also working with a research partner that's going to help, especially when you're looking at recidivism measures, working with the research partner is going to help you identify small wins, especially when you're looking at recidivism reduction outcomes, because that takes a while. Especially when we talk about this grant, this Second Chance Act statewide recidivism reduction grant, we're talking about comprehensive system change, infrastructure change, which you're not going to see recidivism measures for some time, and we'll talk about that in a second. So you have to be able to work with a partner that's going to help you identify some of those intermediate outcome measures, so those small wins to demonstrate that you're going in the right direction. So I think in the very kind of first stage in terms of identifying that suitable partner is being on the same page, knowing their background, seeing what kind of experience they have working with correctional data, seeing if they understand the language, as well as helping you identify those small wins, especially when you're looking at long-term recidivism reduction measures. The second stage, developing the evaluation plan. Iowa's goal in the next 5 years with this comprehensive system change is to reduce recidivism 30%. A lot of the things that we're doing, though, in terms of the grant, we were using this five-pronged approach. We're developing a lot of infrastructure. We're working on developing quality assurance at a system level, not just for our risk assessments, but for our case plans, for our reentry process. We're developing checklists. We're developing a TOT model, train the trainer model for quality assurance. We're developing training packages based on positions. So if you're a correctional officer or you're a probation officer or you're a prison counselor, your training may look a little bit different, especially if you're dealing with mentally ill clients or you have a gender responsive caseload. So we're developing train the trainer models around our training as well as our HR practices. For example, corrections has been historically has been known to in terms of their hiring practices and how they promote people. You get hired, you get promoted based on you've just been there for a long time. And now we're really changing our approach in Iowa Corrections is that we're putting the right people in the right positions, making sure they have the right knowledge and skills. They're demonstrating those practices, and so we're changing our HR practices. And so that's going to take some time because because we want to get the right people in the right positions and practicing the right skills that we know reduce recidivism. So all these things I'm talking about are infrastructure and take time to do. We can't do it in a year. We can do it in 3 years. We can implement it in 3 years, but you're not going to see recidivism measures at year 3. We're going to see it, years out, which takes time, and that's some of the things I'll talk about here in a second. Which, I've been talking with Heather about it. She's our technical assistance provider. Is that's been a challenge for us because we'll implement it in 3 years, but you're really not going to see major recidivism reductions until things are going and moving. Staff is trained. We have the QA in place. We're putting people in the right positions and things like that. So very important piece to consider in terms of evaluation plan is that building enough time to actually get those measures. So as I mentioned earlier in the identifying a suitable partner, one of the things that we're doing with this evaluation plan is not just recidivism reduction measures. We have to identify some intermediate outcomes. So for example, some of the things that I was looking at is number of staff trained using the TOT model. Number of audits completed for our risk needs assessment and case plan. We're running all of our programs through a quality assurance process. We're running through a national clearinghouse first, like Crime Solutions or the What Works Reentry Clearinghouse from the Justice Center. And then if they make that through that phase, then we're doing a preliminary analysis in-house on recidivism outcomes. And then if they pass that, then we're doing a cost-benefit analysis as well. And then if it makes past that part, the program makes past that part, then we do a fidelity check with the QA checklist. So we have a pretty rigorous process in place, but that's going to take time to do because we have, in the institutions alone, we probably have at least 30 plus programs. And in the CBC side, which is the community-based side, we probably have over 100. So it's going to take a while to run all those programs through that process, but it's a good, rigorous process. So we want to be able to capture that as an intermediate outcome. How many programs did we pass through? How many programs did we eliminate? How many staff did we reallocate based on those programs shutting down to programs that we know that work? Things like that. And so I think that's really important in the evaluation plan to capture that stuff. We also did an MOU, memorandum of understanding with our partner. And so some of the things we're going to do is we're going to do some workshops and presentations together. We're also going to do some we're going to do some write up some publications about some of the stuff we're doing. I think is pretty groundbreaking in Iowa, especially around we're developing an institutional workload formula, which is the first of its kind. So we, as a partner, we're going to develop some presentations and some publications as well. And so we went through the IRB approval as well and got approval to do all that. So that's moving in a great direction. The final piece is marriage. Like any good marriage, as Julie would say, is communication is the key. Whether you have it or not, you got to work on it. And it's an evolution. You have to constantly work on communication because you get so busy, especially when you have a research partner and you're busy, trying to implement. The grant is that you kind of have to make sure that you're looping your partner in and getting updates in terms of if timelines have changed and things like that. I think what's more important in this part to talk about is really being realistic about expected outcomes, especially when you're talking about system-wide change. I've had numerous conversations with Heather. My concerns, and I understand that we have the grant, we need to demonstrate results in 3 to 5 years, but when you're talking about major infrastructure change, that's just after it's going to take 3 years to implement. It's going to take multiple years, and John, maybe you can talk about this. It's going to be able to see those those benefits of those changes. It's going to take multiple years afterwards, after the implementation, to actually see those changes. So I think one is being realistic about what to expect in terms of timelines. Second thing I think is really important is to, in terms of relationships too, and with this grant, is to be flexible. I appreciate, when you invest this much money into a grant that, you want to see outcomes, and you want to see, especially when you invest $3 million. So you have to be flexible in terms of what your funders request, and be able to work with your funders in those situations and say, here's some things we think we can do in those 3 years to just demonstrate some progress, as well as here's what we think we can give you in terms of recidivism reduction measures in the next 3 to 5 years or 5 to 7 years, depending what we come up with. The final thing is as part of the responsibility of a grantee, if we know we're going to extend out and do no-cost extensions because we know it's going to take longer than what we think, what we initially thought to get recidivism measures, I think it's our responsibility as a grantees is to budget that out and know that we're going to have to budget accordingly if we know we're going to extend out to year 4 or year 5 in terms of evaluation. So I think that's a really important piece, and that falls on the grantee, and that also is a communication thing for me to share that with BJA or with my TA provider, that here's what we think it's going to be, but we will set money aside so we can do the evaluation and see the results of all the work over the past 3 to 4 years. So I'll stop there because I'm sure you guys probably have some questions, but thank you.
Thank you very much, Beth. That's very informative. My name is John Spear. I'm from Atlanta, Georgia, and I'm working with the Georgia Prisoner Reentry Initiative. Started, I think, October 1, just like many others here. We're very fortunate in Georgia, one of which is we have a governor who wants to leave this as his legacy. That's fairly unprecedented. I think most of you would agree to that. And as a result, the governor has created a particular office to help oversee this effort, and also allows us to make great connections with our other agencies. So we don't end up with as many issues with the other agencies as some of the other people. I'm very pleased to see action-oriented evaluation research, and you'll see some of the issues I'm going to raise as to why. Our evaluation plan was designed around a very sophisticated transition accountability plan, community coordinators. We're operating in 6 sites right now, statewide. And if any of you have been involved in accountability courts, even one at a time, you can imagine the issues involved in seamless integration, implementation, and issues like that. So even though we have logic models, we have outcome measures, both long-term as well as intermediate, things such as drug test, failure to appears, connecting to treatment providers. We're very blessed in Georgia that we have incredible data. I know that may surprise some of you from the South, but we are very blessed to have data. One of the issues I want to go back real quickly is picking your research partner. And as a researcher, this is something that's pretty important to me and my partner. One of which, once you define your requirements, which is the first thing you do you go home or do you go outside? And my partner may say differently. I say stay home if you can. And by that, I mean, I heard about a research partner from your jurisdiction, from your state. Why? They may have relationships that outsiders may not have. All right, now if you have to go outside, there's incredible talent out there. But once you find the talent, staying home. And then what was their reputation in working with local agencies? Is that for the action-oriented research plan to work, you have to have positive and great relationships with the partners you're working with. It's not the old model, we're the evaluators. And that's very important for this to be successful. If you don't have credibility with your partners, they're going to ignore you. So I say stay home if possible, if you can get the right credentials and get the right knowledge. And that's something we've done. We've been in Georgia for 25 years, and we're quite familiar. Another thing is we've done a lot of projects in Georgia, so we have a lot of positive experience working with the field even outside this project, so that helps with some credibility. Of course, the plan, and that's the engagement. It can be very sophisticated. We can count on certain outcome measures. We can discuss in length what we're going to do in terms of our process outcomes and how we're going to do our structured interviews. But if you always heard in the last 15 years, once the battle plan meets the enemy, things begin to change. Yeah. and that's when adaptability, and that's why I'm very excited about this action-oriented approach, and flexibility. Now I'm going to introduce a little term to Heather's incredible outline. It's called the Prenup. All right? And these are things I've learned in the I wish I'd had it in a prenuptial, but we work them out because we have good relationships in Georgia. Don't expect successful implementation immediately. Now, some of you are already saying, well, that's kind of obvious, John.